Hello, my name is Olurotimi Osha, and I'm continuing with my discussion concerning the joint U.S. Israeli war against Iran, which was instigated on February 28th, 2026, with the decapitation of the Iranian leadership and the assassination of its supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Today, what I want to do is talk about the credibility gap, and the propaganda wars, and the war for the sympathies of the public. This always goes on in every war. During the Vietnam War, there was a credibility gap, and which subsequently brought the war to an end after and this was of course underscored with the release of the Pentagon Papers by a Pentagon analyst, Daniel Ellsberg, and of course the U.S. president and the administration the um, had been telling the public that America was winning the war and everything was going in America's favor, without letting them know the casualties that America was actually suffering. Um, and even under Nixon as well, there was the bombing he did of Cambodia and Laos, without even letting the public know it was a secret bombing he did. And so there's always that credibility gap, because America is actually an open society, and where we don't have a dictatorship. So the public has a right to know, since it's taxpayers' money that funds the wars, that funds the military, that funds the government. And so the president's job is to go to Congress, and it's Congress, of course, it's Congress that has the responsibility to declare war. But again, Congress has sort of abdicated this responsibility, especially since the Second World War, when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, and again reinforced with other subsequent attacks like the 9/11 attack. So the reason the Congress gives the president authorization for the use of military force, which presidents have used, broadly to uh, to engage in military exercises that are basically war, is you know to allow the president to be able protect to protect the homeland, really, to protect the homeland. But presidents have used it more broadly to go and engage in wars of aggression. But this is unlike any war we've ever been in, because American forces were used to actually commit a war crime, or violate international law with the decapitation of a sovereign leader, the leader of a sovereign, nation. That's Iran. So that's a violation of international law, and that's what I'm trying to discuss today: the credibility gap that the credibility gap in this Iran war. Again, instances when, um, and of course, the press, the mainstream press as well, has um, has sometimes covered up information and assisted the government in covering up information or misleading the public. We saw this during the Civil War. When I read the personal memoirs of the general of the U.S. Army, the commanding general, and the who won the Civil War on behalf of the Union and preserved the Union. That's General Ulysses Grant. In his personal memoirs, he criticized the northern press. In fact, the press in New England, the northern press, for um, trying to generate disaffection amongst the populace, because this was a civil war. It was brother versus brother fighting each other, and because of the losses, the massive losses, again, and they would excoriate Grant, call him butcher and everything, especially after the Battle of Shiloh, because Union forces, the soldiers, right, the Union's men were dying in huge numbers, right. In fact, again, I've said it before that the Union actually lost more men than the Confederates during the Civil War, because they were going to engage in a war of attrition, basically just throw everything that the Union had. The Union had more manpower, more resources, and Grant was just going to throw everything in order to crush the Confederacy. So the Confederacy, indiscriminately then shot at, they mauled down Union forces, and so the press, Northern press, was very critical. But importantly, Grant criticized the Northern press for uh, over sensationalizing and exaggerating the Confederates' successes or strategies. Especially, he said that it seemed like they were infatuated with General Lee's resume. Right, General Lee was reported to have had the best graduating record in the history of West Point, with no demerits or something like that. So they over, they just, he was sort of inflated in the eyes of, that the press inflated his credentials and his strategies, his tactics in the eyes of the Northern public. And I know this sort of irritated General Grant, Ulysses Grant, and this sort of goes on. So in today, with that's the benefit of having social media. I like social media because it gives you an opportunity for independent journalism. You can get independent sources, just because of corporate media's control by the power structure, right. um, I've been learning from social media, independent sources. I'm very fortunate. There are many people that I actually know in my network. I have access to mainstream people in my network. I'm very fortunate. But I also have people who are, emerging independent journalists, people on ground in Israel, people on ground in Iran. They're able to provide information. We can access information. And something they've been saying is that in Israel, for instance, I don't know how true it is, but there have been independent journalists who are claiming that Israel is actually covering up photographs and losses. They're trying to they're trying to understate their losses and casualties, right? And so, because to influence U.S. public opinion. If Americans believe that we're losing the war, this war will be, they're going to pass a war powers resolution. They're going to stop the war immediately, right? But the thing is, um, regardless, even from the onset, right, the public opinion is already against the war. 60% of Americans right now in the last polls are against the war, which is unusual, unlike previous wars. Normally, presidents enjoy almost unanimous, majority approval, right? Uh, in approval ratings, right? At the onset of wars, President George H.W. Bush had 90% approval ratings. He had support in the Gulf War, same as President George W. Bush, right? Between 70 to 90% approval, public approval rating in his uh, uh, proceedings in the prosecution of the Iraqi invasion in 2003. But right now, from the onset, the Americans are against this war, especially because, one, it wasn't done in self-defense. The information intelligence reports, even from the Pentagon, a lot of people had, generals, many people had indicated that, well, Iran was not a threat to the U.S. they were not in the process of developing a nuclear bomb. That the Ayatollah who was just killed, that in fact he was the one who was restraining their progress towards building a nuclear weapon, and unfortunately, his son is supposed to be the hardliner who's determined to build a nuclear bomb. It's one of the demands that he's placed on conditions he's placed on this determination of conflict, demanding that the U.S. Respect its rights, acknowledge its rights to declare to possess a nuclear weapon. So that's not going so well. So the credibility gap right now is that um, again we're getting all sorts of conflicting information about the numbers of the casualties and the the prosecution of the war, how the progress of the war, and it started from the onset because we didn't even know. Um, Not that we didn't know. I mean, it's confusing, right? There's been this sort of bipolar psychotic uh, explanation for why we're going to war, right? They've been providing different reasons. First of all, it was regime change, and obviously that has not been accomplished, right? Uh, then the next thing it was that there was that Israel was going to strike first, and so we did a preemptive strike. That's been discredited. Then it was also that, well, recently President Trump said, well, that it was just Marco Rubio, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, his um, special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, and his son-in-law Jared Kushner, who, and the Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, who told him that, well, Iran was about to hit the U.S., and so that was why he ordered the strike. So there have been these conflicting statements going on, right, on why America is actually at war, right? Why did America go to war? Because first of all, America did something very extreme that's not been done. It violated international law. Um, Now, people have also been saying, well, that the UN should pass a resolution against the US because of, for violating international laws. Well, that's not quite easily accomplished. That's actually not um, I don't know that if that can be accomplished because the United States is a member of the Security Council, right? It's one of the permanent members in the Security Council. There are five of them that have permanent seats, and those five members were the Allies in the Second World War, and they were the first to be called the United Nations, right? That was the synonym for the Allied forces. They were the United Nations, and that's the United States of America, the United Kingdom, France, China, and it used to be USSR, and now Russia, right? Russia. So those five have veto power, meaning any resolution that by the UN, by the Security Council, can be vetoed by any one of them. So if effectively you can't make any resolution against any one of those five because they're going to veto it. Just like America has been vetoing resolutions against the concerning the Israeli-Palestinian conflict since October 2023, right? The United Nations has tried to pass resolutions to cease the conflict. But America has been, protecting Israel, because Israel is an ally of the United States. So that's another thing that the permanent members do. They use their veto power to also protect their allies. So America has been vetoing any sort of resolution against concerning the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So you can't sanction America. They can't do anything. They can't go to war against America. America is just going to veto it. The UN can't pull forces together. Now there's the UN General Assembly, right? That's the regular nations that don't have the veto power. So these five nations are like the superpowers of the United Nations, which sort of contradicts the purpose of the United Nations, because the idea of the United Nations is that all states are sovereign and they're equal. They're all sovereign and equal states. But these five powers, who were the winners of the Second World War, who came up with the concept of devising the United Nations in the first place, to prevent future conflict, or provide a platform for resolving future conflict. And for the most part, it's done well. But the thing is, these five superpowers have, they have this outsized um, power and influence in the United Nations. So you see, they are literally above the law. In America, in our republic, in our democracy, no one is above the law, right? And according to Western liberalism, right, this is what we've aimed towards since the time of the Magna Carta in 1215. The notion that nobody is above the law, even our rulers are subject to the law. But in the United Nations, even when we're saying, well, these are all these nations, are sovereign and equal, but we see that these five members in the security, these five permanent members, are above the law. So they can invade a nation, they can commit, wars of aggression, possibly genocide, and they can't be sanctioned because these nations have veto power. Now, the General Assembly can pass a resolution against these powers, any of these powers, but whatever resolutions they pass are non-binding, right? They're non-binding, so it's still basically futile. However, on as a in terms of morality, nations have respectively independently criticized the U.S. strike the against Iran. In fact, even neutral Switzerland has criticized the U.S. and called it out for violating international law. So many nations, even England, America's allies, England refused to join in the war, and there's a hot debate in England right now. They've been criticizing the U.S. Many nations that were former, that are supposed to be allies of the U.S., they've been criticizing the joint U.S.-Israeli strike against Iran. They've been calling out America for being the aggressor and violating international law. So, so that's the credibility gap that America and Israel are suffering right now as a result of this ongoing war. Um, and Again, I've talked about the in terms of the underreporting or false reporting. Independent journalists are coming out and saying, well, that the prosecution of the law of the world, the prosecution of the war. I'm sorry, prosecution of the war and the upshots in casualties are being underreported by in Israel, and they're claiming that, in fact, in Israel, that there are laws that banning and criminalizing people from taking photos and things like that, or disseminating uh, photos of casualties in Israel. I don't know how true that is, but people are coming out and saying that, well, that the war, uh, that the joint U.S. and Israeli forces are not doing as well as is being portrayed in mainstream media, which is basically often controlled by state actors, by powerful state actors, and we've seen this time and time again. But the independent journalists are doing a very good job. Um, I've talked about how, of course, the Strait of Hormuz, Iran, it appears, has been able to successfully impede the traffic of trade, of shipping and oil, which again controls over 20% of the world's oil supply. And there are other goods as well. I saw a recent um, interview of someone, who was saying that fertilizer actually, a huge supply of fertilizers, right? Chemical components for fertilizers actually passed through the Strait of Hormuz. And this person was saying that this is subsequently, and a lot of those fertilizers come to America as well and other regions. And it's going to end up causing agricultural products to skyrocket, if this continues for long. So um, now, something I also saw, I saw an interview by the chairman, Joint Chiefs of Staff, U.S. Chairman, Joint Chiefs of Staff. That's um, Dan Kane, and it was in a presser on March 10, 2026, so just about a couple of days ago. And he was asked, if he thought that um, if the Iranian response was more formidable than he'd anticipated. Now, he had praised their adaptability. He said, well, Americans are adaptable. Everybody already knew going in that America had the strongest military in the world, right? So he was talking about, well, that how Iranians have adapted. He's impressed that they've adapted, right? But we said American forces, right? They're also, enterprising. It was what he called them. Was it enterprising or entrepreneurial? I don't know, but resourceful should be the term, though. That they're innovative. Yeah, that they're innovative. I think that was what he said. That they're innovative, so they've adapted as well. He said, while exceeding that they're formidable, right? He didn't say they're not formidable, but he said he wasn't surprised. So, meaning, yes, US forces, US analysts, US intelligence were already aware of the potency, the capability of Iran's army, Iran's military. Again, America is the strongest power in the world, without a doubt. It's strong. Its military is stronger than Iran's in a regular battle formation, right? Regular battle formation. There are many different strategies for warfare, and if you're intelligent, you have intelligent soldiers. If you know that your opponent, your adversary, is stronger than you, you have to use an alternative means of fighting them. And that's why Iran is using asymmetric warfare. So it's using, again, cheaper weapons, all the drones, cheap drones that it had accumulated over the years for decades, right? When it's had these sanctions. And it's attacking America's interests, economic interests in the Persian Gulf, America's allies that would put pressure on America to stop things that would affect the US economy, right? As the price of oil has gone over $100 barrel, $100 per barrel, the stock market has been dropping since its high of 50,512 points on February 10, 2026, just prior to the war. The stock market has slashed 7.6%, right, since that time. It's closing today, as of this time, was 46,677 points. So that's about a 7.6% drop, right? Between yesterday and today, it dropped almost 800 points, right? So over 1.56%. So it's just been dropping. Imagine if it keeps going and things keep getting worse, it's going to eventually impact our economy massively, and we won't be able to write those checks for those massive, those huge, very costly, expensive missiles, right? That have been pitted against Iran's cheaper drones, but doing their work because they deploy them in volumes, in masses, right? Because they're cheap, 20,000 a pop units, attacking drones that cost over $4 million, right? So the math at 100 to 1, it's as Pyrrhus said, Pyrrhus of Epirus, our resources would be drained out. One more victories like this would destroy us, right? Victories, one more victory against victory like this against the Romans will be our utter ruin, right? So, uh, we keep using uh, blowing up millions and millions of dollars per unit of these costly missiles, just against these drones that cost just Iranians just about $20,000 a unit. The math is to our disadvantage. That's a very disadvantageous, substantially disadvantageous calculus. So they're waging a war against our economy, and the world. It's impacting them as well because China is a main ally, but there are probably alternatives they're going to come up with to get their oil to China, right? China already had $1.2 billion in oil reserves. By the way, something that once you've got into war, something else that happens is that people get to observe you fighting, right? People get to observe you fighting. You're, I like to use the analogy of boxing, right? Because I like boxing, right? I don't fight violently, but I box to stay fit, and it keeps you agile, right? That's just hit a punching bag. I watch boxing videos. I liked watching Mike Tyson, Muhammad Ali. So coaches, they study the opponents of their their protege, right? If a boxer is going to fight another boxer, they're going to watch their videos and study their fights, and they take note of their weaknesses so they can exploit their weaknesses. Some, a body that's saying America's weaknesses right now as it engages in war with Iran is China, right? China is seeing all of America's weaknesses. It's seeing its powers. It's seeing its limitations. So there's strengths and limitations. Every being has strengths and limitations. So America relies on very fast, very fast, expeditious um, um, actions. Military actions. Uh, it's not successful in drawn out wars, right? It's not successful doing that, and so it's saying how Iran is faring well against America and Israeli, two powers, right? In by using asymmetric warfare. So it's seeing America's weaknesses. Uh, Russia is also seeing America's weaknesses. The other thing is Russia has been able to get America's attention and the world's attention away from its war against Ukraine. That war since 2022. This is the fourth year. It With the distraction of the U.S.-Israeli war with Iran. Uh, Russia's going to keep getting the advantage. It was using a war of attrition against Ukraine, and it's probably going to end up defeating Ukraine. Ukraine may soon capitulate. We may soon be seeing the capitulation of Ukraine. Of course, NATO seems to be splintering because since President Trump had made the comments regarding the disparaging comments regarding Greenland. We saw NATO sort of taking factions and sort of repudiating America, and Europeans saying, well, they should start considering alternative security measures, right? Become more independent and take more control of their security, European security. So you can see it looks like NATO fracturing. Hopefully that doesn't happen. But so that's the credibility gap with this war with Iran. America is looking like the aggressor, like we're doing what uh, Germany did against Poland when it invaded Poland during the Second World War, and when Japan, right, bombed Pearl Harbor in the Second World War. That's sort of what we've done now. We've instigated a war against a party that didn't attack us. It's not for us to dictate to another nation how they should run their government, what religion they should have. Even in America, right? Our First Amendment protects freedom of religion, right? We have lots of Muslims. We have Iranian Americans in America. We have we have Jewish people in America. We have Christians in America, right? So if we protect these rights in America, who are we to go and impose on another nation, right? A sovereign nation that's doing its thing. So long as their interests don't, conflict with our interest, and if they do, we can use, we can uh, use negotiations and negotiating table to work out our differences, right? Uh, Teddy Roosevelt said, talk with a soft voice and walk with a big stick. He didn't say, well, go and start hitting everybody with that big stick, right? The idea is, the threat of force, is more effective sometimes than actually using that force. Because once you've gotten into it, once you've used force, right, just like Newtonian physics, the third law of Newtonian physics, once you've engaged in an action, expect an equal reaction, right? A counteraction, self-defense. They're going to now they can surprise you by the way they react to your aggression, right? They can surprise because they're no longer intimidated. They're now fighting for survival, right? So they're going to shock you. They're going to suppress you. They're going to surprise you. The way they might even fight back might even demoralize you that you have the superior forces. That's the thing about fighting, right? It might end up making you run away. Uh, anyway, if you're interested in learning about warfare, people like to quote Art of War a lot. Sun Tzu. I had that book. I owned it since I was in business school. Really, I don't even really understand that book. I don't know what's so significant about it. But if you want to really study strategies in war, go and read the Bible. The Bible is very, very effective. Maybe that's why the Bible is still the best-selling masterpiece or book in the world. So go and read the Bible. If you want to check on wars, you can start to read from Judges, the book of Judges, the book of Joshua. It has a lot on warfare and strategy. The book of Judges, Joshua, First and Second Samuel, um, First and Second Kings, and First and Second Chronicles. Those talk a lot about warfare and psychological warfare, the strategy and things like that, the use of decoy, subterfuge, and you understand these are all components and elements that go into waging war. My name is Olurotimi Osha, and I just wanted to talk about the increasing credibility gap and the damage to the reputation of the U.S. in engaging with this in this war against Iran. Of course, many different nations have criticized America for violating international law, and we were known as the honest brokers in the world, where many nations regarded us as wanted us to be the policeman of the world. I don't support that, but many nations saw us as being so trustworthy that we should be. They viewed us as the policeman of the world. Now, if we're supposed to be honest brokers, then we don't uh, infringe on the law. We're supposed to uh, uphold and adhere to international law. We haven't done that in this unprovoked war against Iran. My name is Olurotimi Osha, and I'll keep you posted. Thank you.